Good evening and welcome to KZGN-TV and the Thursday evening edition of Ridgecrest Talk. I'm Robert Eierman along with co-host Al Huey, and tonight we are privileged to have with us Mr. Keith Laumeux, City Attorney for the City of Ridgecrest. Thanks for being here.
It's my pleasure.
And we're going to talk with Keith about a variety of things. I think you wanted to start, Al. You had a question.
Yeah, well,
ready.
I thought it'd be interesting first, Keith, for you to kind of encapsulate in a few words or paragraphs the history of Laumeux and O'Neill with the city and when it started. Because I was here when your dad was doing it.
Right.
So
yeah, and I think, of course, some of that's before my time. I started practicing in '92.
Okay.
But I can tell you that before I was practicing law, he had me be his driver in the summertime when I was off school. So I would drive up here, and the city hall was over
on Balsam.
On Balsam,
yeah.
right? It was like a converted bank, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So I would drop him off and watch the city council meetings, not really realizing someday I'd be sitting up there, which was kind of interesting. And then when it got too boring, I'd go drive down and watch.
And that was back in when? Do you know that the law offices took it over?
Well, I know that I was driving.
80s, I think.
Yeah, when I drove him up here, I remember going to the theater and watching Top Gun. So that'd probably make it
late 80s.
Late 80s, right?
Yeah. Okay.
And
then you went to law school, passed the bar,
right.
and you took it over about what? 8 years ago? 9 years ago?
Yeah. Well, I would substitute for him when he was out for a while. So I remember attending some meetings probably in the late 90s.
Okay.
And I started doing it more as a full-time thing. Yeah, maybe, I don't know, my memory's getting bad for time, but something like that, I guess, 8 years.
Yeah, about 8, 9 years, something like that.
Long time.
And so you heard about the election, of course.
Yes, I did. I'm about to go meet some of our new candidates, I guess.
Yeah, hopefully they'll all be there.
I guess I called them candidates. They're actually not, a little bit more than candidates at this point.
We have
council member, election member.
Yeah, that's right. We have new mayor and two new, well, semi-new council members. One is a returning council member. I don't know if
Yeah,
you
but
were
that was
familiar with
from
him.
mid-80s?
Yeah.
You talk about
early,
Michael Mount.
Yeah, early 90s, I think, was the latest he served.
I've talked to him a couple times, but I've never done any work for him before. But
He was on the council when I came here. Matter of fact, I think he was mayor for a while.
Could have been mayor. He certainly was mayor.
Yeah. But, three new members.
And then Peggy, I guess, is a returning.
No, she's never served.
She's been on the water board, the airport board, and very active in the community, but I don't think, I'm sure she's never been on the council.
Not that I recall.
So water board, and she's collecting the whole set.
Yeah, exactly.
She'll
School board's next, I guess.
and then she'll run the table at that point.
But we had, what, pool of six candidates for mayor?
Yes.
5 for city council?
Right.
And we expected some, but I think Peggy Breeden was kind of expected by most people. And for city council, it was really up in the air.
Yeah.
On expectations, anyway.
Right.
But so 3 new faces, and I guess that hasn't happened since back in the early to mid 80s.
I believe that's what.
Well, we didn't. We had 3 new faces 2 years ago. Right. We had Sanders,
right. Sanders,
Acton,
and Clark.
Oh, that's right.
Although Clark also was a returning.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So he wasn't quite as new a face, but it's the same thing. He'd been off for a while.
A couple of years, I think.
Yeah.
So you're right.
You're right.
I sit
Good point.
corrected.
And I suspect we'll probably see more of that turnover with the 2-year mayor position. But since the mayor is up every 2 years,
right.
there's always a very strong possibility of 3 new people coming on every 2 years.
That's true.
That's true. Yeah. Because
right.
it'll
More
be 2
than in the
council
past.
seats every 2 years.
Yeah. Well, you do. Yeah, 2 council and the mayor, of course.
Yeah. So there's a possibility of.
Yeah.
You're right. Hadn't thought about that.
Right. I hadn't either. I was just so into it being all the same. It has been for so long.
Yeah.
And of course, the people that have been on 16 or more years, Mr. Holloway and Mr. Morgan.
I think longer than that.
Yes, I think Morgan's longer than that. But anyway, they got, quote, term limited.
the old-fashioned way, right?
The old-fashioned way, yeah.
Well, and I think those very long terms were kind of unusual historically. Again, I don't I wasn't here going way back, but I think there was more sort of change for one reason or another.
Yeah, and I think there's some things that might have contributed to that. When we went through the BRAC, we didn't want to lose people who had a lot of corporate history and contacts at state and federal level. So,
and of course, Mr. Holloway was mayor at the time, and he did a fabulous job during the BRAC.
Well, actually, they both did.
Well, yeah, but
I have to commend them for all the contributions they made while they were on the council. It's a really hard job. It takes a lot of time.
It's a very hard job.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, seeing it from, I guess the behind the table view, the things that they have to do,
they call it part-time, but
yeah, right.
Yeah,
you put in some hours.
You're on call, I think, constantly, right?
And preparation, and all the preparation for the meetings.
I've got a couple buddies that are doctors, and they like their jobs, but the things that they dread the most, I guess, is just going home and not being able to leave the job when you're on call. And I imagine when you're doing this job, city council, you're always on call.
Yeah,
you can't leave it alone. You never know when something's going to come up and someone wants to get a hold of you, I guess. So anyway,
what will you, or when will you sit down with the newly elected officials to brief them as far as the legal side of everything?
Yeah, we've got some litigation going on, and we've got some tort claims coming up. So, in fact, it seems to be I'd call it a period of higher than average litigation right now, potentially. And so one of the things we'll do either in December or early January is kind of a omnibus closed session where we'll list off everything and then walk through all of the items that we've got in front of us.
But do you sit down with newly elected officials and brief them in any way as far as an elected official for the city, what they should not do?
Oh yeah, I've called number one, some of our new ones are sort of old, experienced members in terms of being elected officials, but I've called them up, and mainly what I need to tell them is the Brown Act applies to them, because that's something that may not be intuitive to people. And of course, with two of them having served, they're sort of familiar with what all that means. And we also send them out a packet that's actually some chapters from my father's book that kind of lays out some of the broader concepts like conflict of interest and everything for them to sort of get used to and sink into. So we have a lot of...
we got to go to break, and we'll get back to that subject in just a few seconds.
Okay, great.
Join us. We'll be right back. Ridgecrest Talk, Thursday nights. Welcome back. We're here tonight with Mr. Keith Laumeux, the city attorney, and before we went to break, we were talking about, the discussions you have with newly elected officials. You said you send them a packet or something, a copy of your dad's book.
Parts of it. Yeah.
Parts of it.
Yeah.
And that they need to be aware of the Brown Act. And is there any information you pass on to them regarding that, as far as you need to go to this website and study this, or?
Well, we the main thing with the Brown Act is, as far as they're concerned, is not to discuss city business with any elected or people that have won the election but haven't been sworn in. Not to discuss city business with other people in that context if they can avoid it, so that we don't accidentally create a meeting out of the presence of the public. And it's a real strong temptation when people first get elected, before they come onto the board, they want to, you want to get in there and do something.
Okay. But after they're elected, it's different. Or after they're
when they're sworn in, it's the same rules. They can't. You can't go down to you can't go down to the coffee shop and start talking about what you want to do about street repairs or something. Out of the context of a public.
You mean
meeting.
if the citizen were to contact a council member?
It's no problem 2 people is generally no problem. It's when you get 3.
Okay, that's what you were talking
Yeah,
about.
Robert's saying it correctly. That's right.
Okay.
So they can't, for example, what could easily happen is they can't call up, let's say, the outgoing people and say, hey, tell me about what's going on with this, that, and the other thing, and then start sort of developing a consensus. You could have a serial meeting that
That's
way.
right.
So they call 2 people up and say, tell me about this topic. Now, if they're not making a decision, I suppose that's fine. But if they have a conversation where it can be construed that sort of a consensus is reached, now you have a potential Brown Act problem.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And I can understand that with a new person on the council, they want to get up to speed,
right?
And you have to advise them to be very careful,
right,
of how they approach that.
Right. So the best person for them to talk to is the city manager or the city attorney, and we'll be careful that we don't pass on anything that they tell us or any questions they have about a particular topic. That's the easiest way to handle it. But again, you get elected, you want to, you ran because you want to do something.
Right.
And so I think there's a very strong instinct, at least initially, to try to kind of throw yourself in there, especially, there's that expression, hit the ground running, right? Mm-hmm. So you want to come in and be effective right away. And, you got to be careful with that. So that's issue one. The other issue that they need to be aware of is conflict of interest. I also had some questions about incompatible offices that came up, and that's another issue. So, conflict of interest is a very complicated area of the law.
Incompatible offices, were you referring to the one candidate that was running for school board and city council?
No.
Okay.
No. And I'd rather not talk about the nature of the conversation, but what I can tell you about incompatible offices is that's some people call that conflict of interest, but it's not. It's where you're sitting on 2 elected, you have sort of 2 elected offices that you're simultaneously sitting on, and the question is, can you sit on both? When can you sit on both, and when can't you sit on both?
Okay.
And the rule is that if one of the boards or councils that you're sitting on has the ability to take action that can affect the other public entity, you can't sit on both of those.
Okay.
And so, and that comes up a lot because, again, very civic-minded people, they sit on a lot of boards and commissions. That happens a lot.
We were speaking earlier about the Brown Act. I just wanted to bring up something. There's been some consternation as to whether council members get advised that it might be a Brown Act violation or some other difficulty if they respond to the public during public comment, especially, but also during discussion on an action item. Do you tell them anything, or what are the guidelines that you give them, or do you give them anything?
Well, there's sort of 2 issues, sort of 2 bodies of law, I guess, that it could come up in that question. One is the Brown Act. As far as discussing things during public comment, the Brown Act says, now the issue with public comment is they're bringing up topics expressly that are not on the agenda.
Absolutely.
Right.
So what the Brown Act wants to avoid is a situation where just some member of the public comes up, says something about a topic, and all of a sudden the city council's discussing it and maybe making a decision, right? So what the Brown Act says is that the city council can respond briefly to topics raised by the public and can direct items to staff, and that's it. So there are limits on what they can say in response to non-agenda items. Now, there's not a magical bright line there. What does that mean, respond briefly? And, sometimes we have back and forth that go on a little bit more than, but they're supposed to limit that to a brief response.
And the Brown Act says that?
The Brown Act says that.
And so, but
and then they're allowed to refer the item to staff.
Right.
Okay. So and what that
or a council member regarding something, say, I can get back to you on that.
Right. That would be a brief response.
Okay.
You see, and so in other words, what I take that is an admonishment. Don't talk about this substantively for any. Don't provide a significant.
Because I thought the Brown Act says you could discuss items, but you just can't take any action.
Well, I think I'd have to pull it up, but I think the language actually says briefly respond is the quote I'm recalling.
But that is open to interpretation, whether it be 30 seconds or 2 minutes. One, depending on how you looked at it, that could be a brief response.
Right, and remember too, when you're talking about Brown Act violations. you obviously want to conduct the meeting pursuant to the Brown Act, but there are violations that are more significant than others. If the city council takes action on something in violation of the Brown Act, then you've got something that's actionable.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, absolutely.
If somebody mouths off for an extra minute and a half in violation of the Brown Act, there's
we
nothing.
had a recent incident that you may recall not too long ago where you were actually kind of involved with some discussion, I shall say, or debate between one of the council members and a member of the public that actually took place after the public member sat down, and then the council member responded in her comment section. I shouldn't have said her. In their comment section, and then it got into kind of a...
And then that gets to, remember I told you there were two areas of law that sort of potentially apply. The other is Robert's Rules of Order, and that has to do with how we conduct the process of the meeting. Now, Robert's Rules of Order is not contained in the Brown Act. The Brown Act just says you guys can come up with whatever parliamentary procedure you want to conduct your meetings.
Okay.
And the city is supposed to be acting under Robert's Rules of Order. There's a lot of confusion about that because there's sort of the formal mammoth version of Robert's Rules of Order that they might use in the Senate, and then there's kind of the informal version that we use. And
we need to take another break, unfortunately.
Okay.
But are you familiar with Robert's Rule 17?
Offhand? No, what's that? Shut the hell up?
No, that's mine.
That's your rule?
I tease people. I said, you're not complying with Robert's Rule number 17. They said, what's that? Robert's always right.
We'll be right back. Don't go away.
This is the, I see where this is going.
Yes.
Bringing back old times.
Yes, that's what we thought.
Give us a second here while we get our stuff together here.
Are we on?
I think so.
Oh, okay.
Because they wanted to catch your reaction.
I was tempted to hide under the chair.
Well, I mentioned it to you early when we that we wanted to talk about a subject.
Yeah, I know.
And you said you would be willing to, but I'm somewhat limited how far you could go. So obviously we're back, and if you're not familiar with these yellow shirts, what was it, a little over 2 years ago? Or longer?
Oh, more than 4.
4 years
It's getting close to 5 now.
Wow.
I've slept since then. So.
Yes, I know.
So about 4 years ago, we had an issue in this town. Actually, it occurred about this time of the year, I think.
Yeah, about 5.
Yeah. And what happened is, evidently, or what we were told, is the state said the city was no longer meeting their deferment for the landfill, recycling, and we were over the limit. And so the state supposedly mandated that the city institute mandatory trash pickup and mandatory recycling for all residential and commercial businesses. It didn't go over too well. The short of the long is a bunch of us, there was about 5 of us on the yellow shirts, as we've been referred to, that got together, wrote up an initiative, and in one day, we got enough signatures to qualify it. But we went for more just for the insurance aspect of it. But what that showed, in one day, I don't know anybody, at the same time, Mr. Wicknick was doing his initiative for the term limits and the elected mayor. And it took him months before he was comfortable that he had enough signatures.
I think he ended up having to do his over again, too.
Yes, he did.
I don't remember why, though. There's something wrong with
I don't remember why either.
Language.
But anyway, so, we thought we were following the election code on what the steps were to bring an initiative before the people to put on the ballot. And we thought we were going through those steps. which is very kind of time consuming and tedious, and you got to make sure the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed. And we got to the last portion, and there were, according to the election code, 2 options left to the council. One was to adopt the initiative, and the other was to put it on the ballot. But a third option became available, and that's what we want to discuss about with you.
Okay.
Is where did the city or the law firm find a loophole, I will call it, or the out, to deny putting it on the ballot?
Yeah, so we're talking about something that was 4 or 5 years ago, so
Yeah.
my recollection's a little hazy. So
Okay.
So forgive me if I start if I can't give you quotes for citations.
But the
or
best of
whatever.
your recollection.
The best of my recollection is that the issue was that where a piece of proposed legislation, which is what an initiative is so internally inconsistent and flawed that it's sort of non-functional, particularly, well, I'll get to that in a second, that the city has an option of not calling for an election on it because it's essentially broken, at the time it's going in front of the public. And now, as far as the details as to why, I don't recall all
But
the
isn't that
details.
usually, if it goes through the process, like I said, well, let me finish.
Yeah.
Because that you had to review the initiative before we even went out and got signatures.
That's correct, as I recall.
And there were some discussions back and forth, and finally you signed off on it.
Yes, but I didn't sign off. I wasn't the drafter, and I wasn't proofreading it for content.
You were just giving it a title and...
I think it was. I think there's sort of 2 issues. I mean, there's the language of what the legislation says itself,
Right.
and then there's the issues surrounding how it's presented.
Yeah.
And I think, and again, I very hazy. on
That's
this.
where, at least we thought, if it was going to be denied, that's where it would have been stopped, right there at the very beginning.
Well, I think I gave suggestions so that it could be circulated. So there was some additional sort of mechanical problems with the way it was presented,
Yes.
as I recall.
And I think
that.
those
the only
changes
thing
were made.
And I think the only thing I was looking at that point was, under the law, can this be circulated?
Right.
And
Yes,
so
that would be your
I,
task then.
and so I made suggestions, and I think it was changed in that.
Then let's just move along real quick. We
Yeah.
ended up in a legal battle that pursued once it was denied. And our first time in court, was it O'Neill that was representing the firm? Some lady.
No, it was a lady.
Christine Carson?
Yes, that's
Okay,
who it was.
that's who it was. Anyway,
Real
we
tight.
got over to Bakersfield. We were there with a representative of who were representing us legally, and the bailiff. We got there and says, "Okay, everybody has to sit outside the courtroom until
He
your
threw
case."
us out of the courtroom. We were inside.
Yeah, we were in. Have to sit outside until your case is called. So we went outside. We didn't know that Christine was representing Laumeux at that time. So we're sitting out there with our attorneys,
30 seconds.
waiting and waiting and waiting. I see this lady, who was Christine, and she gets up and she walks in. I didn't think anything of it because we didn't know.
Right.
And pretty soon we hear we question and said, "Oh, we already heard that. It was dismissed because the other side wasn't represented." What?
Well, I'm sure that was that undone later.
No.
No.
We had to challenge it again, and there were a couple, 3 more.
Well, you guys had made opposition. Again, I don't remember this very
Yeah.
well, but in fact, I was in Napa Valley at that point with
Yeah.
my family. So
Yes.
what did you guys supply a written opposition?
It was in our attorney's hands. I don't know
Yeah.
what they had planned.
And unfortunately, our attorney, just before the court, had a heart attack, so he had some people helping him, and it all went awry. But I think the biggest point is that the result of the citizens rising up, the community is better off.
They've saved some money, right?
Yes, the citizens of Ridgecrest have saved up till now over $6 million by having.
Let me
the
say this
new
on this
track.
topic, just broadly speaking. I don't like having to deny the citizens the opportunity to, or recommend anyway, that the city deny an initiative. I mean, that's, things should go to the voters. That's my view.
Right.
And this was an unusual circumstance.
We're getting told that we are out of time.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I'll have to come back then.
Well,
That'd
before
be
you
terrific.
leave,
We'd love to have you back.
yeah, we would. Before you leave, we have a part.